Well, hello, Dr. Tony Lloyd. Very excited to speak to you today. So, you are a leading ADHD specialist and driving force in advocating and raising awareness for ADHD across the UK, and as we've established globally, because I also love following your work in Australia. You are a psychologist and an academic, and it is really, really impressive the work that you do and the awareness and advocacy that you are spreading. I think it is so important. It's a pleasure to have a chat with you today and hear your thoughts on ADHD and how it's perceived and serviced in the education space. Education itself has undergone, huge changes post COVID-19 with online learning and now, the AI bubble and the expansion of AI tools, which is great. But neurodivergent students have seen the biggest increase in enrollment rates in higher education than any other cohort, which is fantastic. And this is due to, an increase in diagnosis and awareness of ADHD, ASD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and more. And you are an academic yourself. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing your opinion on ADHD and education settings from both the student perspective, but also what can be changed and implemented by teachers and education institutions themselves to better service the needs of ADHD. But just to kick off with an introduction, can you tell me a little bit about your origin story and how you came into researching and advocating for ADHD?
Um, Thanks very much, Alex, and thanks very much for having me. And thank you to all the students and um, education professionals who are going to be watching this. Um, I realised at the age of 29 that I had ADHD. But of course, when I checked about this, uh, when I realised I was ADHD, which was in 1991. He apparently grew out of ADHD at 16 on your 16th birthday. And it wasn't something that you could have as an adult then, apparently. Um, so I was kind of figuring out I'd gone back to university to do a master's and doctorate. And I was trying to understand, Alex, well, how do I learn successfully? Because I know I struggled as an undergrad. And so I did a lot of research around positive psychology, positive psychiatry, some great stuff coming out of Harvard and Stanford in sort of the late 80s and 90s, around what was then called accelerated learning and multiple intelligence theory, etc. Um, so I developed learning skills that suited my particular cognitive kind of profile. And then obviously went on to sort of achieve academically. And uh, my doctoral study was also on ADHD, specifically correlation between heart rate variability as a measure of cognitive functioning, immune functioning, um, and uh, ADHD. Because what we found was that through simple techniques and strategies like breath work, using biofeedback software and MRI scans, that actually helping children learn how to regulate, even just through breathing, actually improve their cognitive functioning and their ability to self-regulate. So that really kind of fired my enthusiasm. And then got involved with a charity when it was first founded in 2007 called the ADHD Foundation, which sadly is closed now. But at the time, one of the things that struck me was just how awful it was for so many children with ADHD. And it made me reflect back a lot on my own experience of school. I was an academically gifted child who underachieved. Um, and I remember sort of lots of things like, if you're not sitting still when you've been told to sit still, that means you're being disobedient. I was thinking, no, I just couldn't stop fidgeting. And if I didn't get a grade A in in all my exams, I was lazy or I was not trying when that wasn't true either because um, I had a poor working memory and I used to get really anxious in exams and freeze. I would walk out of the exam board and remember all the answers to the questions that I couldn't remember in it, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. And I think the more I learned, the more I think I realized as well that I had this kind of epiphany. And I was thinking, well, this stereotype of ADHD about naughty, fidgety boys, because of course it didn't affect girls, did it? Apparently, until very recently. Um, and it just wasn't true. And in my work, sort of providing psychological therapies and learning support for young people, and the referrals I got described these young people as defiant and lazy and all these other horrible kind of descriptors. And I thought, that's not how I experience them. Um, and what I also realized, Alex, was that I knew a lot of people who thought like me, learned like me, probably had ADHD, but I was thinking, but they're really successful. But if you read the literature, it's like, well, you're no good. You're somehow morally undeserving, morally weak, don't know how to behave, not going to come to anything. And of course, all the academic research suggested that there were these terrible outcomes for anybody with ADHD across the lifespan. And really, when you look back, now we recognize that, well, only five, there's 6% of the global population have ADHD, but actually, only about 10%, 15% at the most of people with ADHD ever get a diagnosis. So, what happened to the other 85% of people with ADHD? It's 1 in 20 people have ADHD, and the great majority of us never got a diagnosis. And our life chance trajectories were quite different. So it made me question what some of the research was saying, not just about who I was, but what my life chances were, because they certainly didn't reflect my experience or a lot of other people's experience. And then, of course, you look at the world now. I mean, even in the history curriculum, we know that Leonardo da Vinci had ADHD and dyslexia, um, a great polymath. And we know that Einstein had um, uh, was on the autistic spectrum and had speech and language delay, I think until he was about 6 years of age. And I was thinking, well, would they be in the special needs class? I wasn't put in the special needs class because I was a nice kid and I wasn't naughty and I wasn't stupid. Um, but in fact, there were a lot of very intelligent children that I went to school with who I think were inaccurately labeled. Um, and particularly because we know that nearly half of people with ADHD are also dyslexic. You know that every exam you did, you were marked down for your written literacy when that bore no reflection on your knowledge and skill and your aptitude, or indeed your IQ. So I thought, wow, this is wrong. Something needs to change here. Um, but I don't think I realized until about 2012, Alex, that my thinking really was it was an epiphany in the sense that God, I'm challenging centuries old notions. Well, what is intelligence and how do we measure it?
Mm.
And what is it that we teach in schools and colleges? Um, are we enabling people to learn, or are we disabling them and saying, well, if you don't learn the way I teach, it's either because you're lazy, you're stupid, or there's something medically wrong with you. But either way, I can abdicate responsibility um, for changing, how I teach, because you don't belong in my classroom. Um, and I thought, well, I know lots of people who have very healthy and successful lives who've got ADHD. Um, so this stereotype isn't helping, and it concerned me that it was just reinforcing this idea that, well, if you're not a certain type of person, you don't belong in this classroom. And I didn't identify with being disordered, which is how I'm defined through a medical lens. I didn't identify as disabled, which is um, how we're classed in education, having a learning disability. I just thought, well, I have a different way of learning. It doesn't mean that I'm less intelligent or less able. Um, so my message to anybody out there is if you're an education professional, your priority is to enable, not disable, and not create some intellectual apartheid where only a certain type of learner belongs in the classroom because our brains are only half formed when we're born. Um, our intelligence and our neurogenesis is also 50% genetic potential and 50% impact of the environment that we live in. So for me, it was a very kind of um, passionate thing when I encountered so many people, and I just thought, this is not right. And it's such a waste of talent. And history is full of great minds. If somebody had told me at school about Leonardo da Vinci or Einstein, or the fact that Eleanor Roosevelt, who founded the United Nations, was dyslexic, then Walt Disney was dyslexic. Maybe I would have had a very different understanding of myself as somebody who had potential and ability.
Yeah, and I think we kind of appreciate that ADHD competitive advantage when you talk about, Steve Jobs, the inventor of the iPhone, or Greta Thunberg with climate action. But
Yeah,
it
yeah.
comes back to the classroom and why aren't we celebrating these extraordinary minds, in the classroom?
Mm.
And I think with a lot of your work and what I've seen is you really do blend that kind of lens of neuroscience as well as the, positive psychology, which I think is a really interesting intersection because it's not just looking at how the brain works with ADHD, but also how does it thrive with ADHD. So how do you think, and I know this is a huge question, but what do you think, schools and universities can do to move from that deficit model to a strength-based approach when we talk about teaching and accommodating students with ADHD?
I think we have to start, Alex, with reframing our concept of well, what is intelligence, because I think within our education system historically, the emphasis has been on knowledge acquisition
Yeah.
and then intellectual, how we measure intellectual intelligence, usually in the form of a huge memory test at the end of academic year. I'm a great believer in Howard Gardner was the first person, wasn't he, to coin the phrase of multiple intelligence, that there are lots of different types of intelligence. My husband, for example, is an academic genius who got A's all the way through school with everything and in college, but he always kind of only just about scraped the C in mathematics. And he was berated at school for not trying hard enough because there was this idea that, well, if you're intelligent at everything. That's not true at all. He found out in his 40s he had dyscalculia and dyspraxia. So going on holiday with a map before the days of iPhones and Google Maps and things was great because Colin would have this map and this everything all worked out, and we would still get lost because he didn't understand the concept of true north. Now it sounds, I mean, it's funny, but it's not funny in another sense, particularly if you're trying to reverse path. But the point is, intelligence is multiple, and I think for any education professional, we've got to accept that by and large, the paradigm within our education system, the Western education system, which was obviously imported into Australia, is this idea that it's fundamentally knowledge based, and our system of measuring it is largely through memory. Well, here's the thing: the cognitive competency of having a great memory. 50 years ago, before we all had a home computer and an iPhone, having a great memory was a really valued cognitive competency. But now that we all have one of these, and we have the internet and access to every library and academic paper in the world and God knows what, then is having such a good memory as important to cognitive competency as it once was? So I think for teachers, first of all, let's reappraise what we mean by intelligence and ability and potential, and think about how we design and deliver lessons so that they are neuro-inclusive, because at least 1 in 5 young people in your classroom or lecture theatre are going to have either dyslexia, which affects 1 in 10, ADHD, which affects at least 1 in 20, dyscalculia, which affects 1 in 10, dyspraxia, which affects approximately 1 in 20, and autism, which affects approximately 1 in 67, depending on which research paper you read. And they are all extremely broad spectrums.
Mm.
And I don't know who it was who invented these arbitrary lines that says, well, you're disordered and you're not. And that didn't include girls or women, by the way, until very recently. And some of you are also disabled, but you stopped being disabled at 16. Um, who decided that? And I think we've got to look back at, let's be honest about certain eugenicist influences in our concept of what is normal, what is neurotypical. We used to define people of color as educationally subnormal in the diagnostic manuals for medicine right up until the 60s. If you were LGBTQ, you were still classed as mentally ill right up until 1994. Think about how historically we've treated people who were different, who were not like us. When really what we need in our education system is to embrace in a neuroaffirmative way that there is an evolutionary reason why 1 in 5 of us have one of these different minds, at least 1 in 5. And therefore, that is the universal design. And we can't just say, well, I'm sorry, 20% of you don't count, you don't belong here. And it's really important, as any education professional will know, is that fundamental to the human condition, we need to understand who we are. Know thyself is still, an important statement for any education professional to understand. Know how you learn. Know understand your particular neurocognitive strengths and what strategies and approaches that you can use to compensate or overcome certain neurocognitive challenges that you might have. So you mentioned about executive functioning before, Alex. You know, prioritizing and time management, self-regulation, memory, um, planning and organizing, um, and thinking about all these different executive functioning skills is that everybody's got a brain as unique as their fingerprint. And there is no reason why we can't design and deliver neuro-inclusive, neuro-affirmative um, lessons and learning exercises. I was going to use the word lecture then, but we don't really do chalk and talk anymore, do we?
No.
Um, and recognize that movement is integral to effective learning and embedding things into memory. And recognizing as well that as a social species where the genetic imperative is relationship driven, really beginning to re-evaluate the role of emotion in learning, because from the age of 0 to 18, before our frontal lobe is fully developed, most of the decisions we make in childhood are driven by emotion. And there's been this long-standing kind of academic notion of the triumph of reason over emotion, and yet emotion is the software that provides the charge to encode knowledge, which we then store on our hard drive, if you like. And therefore, seeing young human beings as constantly evolving, constantly learning in a multifaceted way, and that what we're trying to teach young people is how to be healthy, successful human beings, achieve in areas that are of interest to them, learn about things that are different, be surrounded by people that are different, because we live in a very different world. Um, and, I think young people, particularly now, are much more embracing of diversity. Their friendship groups are multiracial. Young people don't care whether you're black, Chinese, gay, straight, trans, dyslexic, ADHD, and they don't see themselves as disordered or disabled. We live in an age of identity politics, don't we? And really, that's about, do I belong? Who am I? Um, Young people only care about what you know when they know that you care about them. And teaching and learning is a relationship. Um, and the human neurocognitive ability and potential is so diverse that it presents fascinating and interesting challenge to any education professional about what enables somebody to become a successful lifelong learner who knows how to care for themselves and others, who has character and ethics and values and an ideal sense of self that is going to enable them to flourish and be a valued member of society, not just somebody who's going to pass an exam and their grade reflect on me as an education professional.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, in a perfect world, everyone would be a sample size of one, and you just approach education and it was, it wasn't importance
You,
based, it was interest based, and yeah, yeah,
the
go down.
bell curve is getting flatter, isn't it? Bell curve is getting flatter. What we consider normal, but again, we've got to look at the historical and political context. That what we defined as normal was narrowed because there was a lot of selection going on about, well, are you like us? Do you belong here? Who are the deserving and undeserving, and why are they undeserving? And a lot of academic research is justified why we exclude people. Oh, well, we used to say this about people of color, didn't we? They don't do very well at school. They're less likely to get a job. They're more likely to end up in the justice system, not because they were lacking in intelligence, but because of the environmental factors that reinforced, our prejudices and our ignorance and our um, long established hierarchies, should we say.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting as well. There's a lot of jargon over this side of the world around ADHD with educators when they say there's one in every classroom, when in fact there's probably multiple in every classroom. But one of my, childhood friends, she just completed her teaching degree and she did not do one single paper or topic on any sort of neurodiversity, like at all. So she entered her first classroom as a new teacher and had no idea how to, accommodate a student that may be inattentive or hyperactive.
Right.
And
How are
it's,
we training teachers, Alex? This is the
yeah,
question, isn't it? Are we training them to teach, or are we training them as, I mean, in the UK, it's we train them how to deliver a curriculum and how to assess for it. We don't teach them anything about children or
no.
developmental psychology or the neuroscience of learning or neurodiversity. I mean, it's beginning to change finally in the UK because it's become too expensive not to do so.
Yeah, yeah, well, exactly. And th this friend in question, she's actually gone back to university to study autism specifically because she just said she felt so helpless not being able to help students who needed help and had so much potential, but the curriculum just didn't service that. But you did lead me into my next question of how do you think training can evolve for teachers to better support students with ADHD? Because, in the future, it's classrooms are more likely to be open and more diagnosed and more neurodiverse than ever, right? So what do you think can be done?
Well, I think what we've got to recognize as well is there are certain professions where we know attract certain neurotypes. So, for example, we know that approximately half of the legal profession are on the autistic spectrum. We know approximately half of engineers are autistic. We know that, according to the research, 29% of entrepreneurs have got ADHD. 40% of millionaires are dyslexic. 55% of people in the construction industry identify as either dyslexic or ADHD. 70% of people in sales and marketing identify as either dyslexic or ADHD. The thing is, these people have always been there, hiding in plain sight. And we know, don't we, that when we leave education, Alex, we choose lifestyles and professions that play to our cognitive strengths. You don't have that choice in school.
Mm.
And I'm a big fan of medication in school because I mean, the research evidence on its efficacy is unquestionable. Um, God, I wished I'd had that when I was a child at school. You choose medication as an adult. It certainly made a huge difference to me. Um, but I think if we understand that you can excel in certain academic subjects or certain humanities subjects or art subjects, whatever it might be, um, and you can have a genius IQ, but it doesn't mean to say that you're going to be great at everything. So I mentioned before about my husband being dyspraxic. Obviously, he was never going to be a great sportsman. Um, and we know that learning to play a musical instrument and uh, drama lessons have a really powerful impact on how the brain is developing in young people. Um, and it is about finding ways to enable young people to achieve their potential. And I know we have to have some measure of success, but I think our assessment protocols are obsolete.
Mm.
And we've also got to understand that, you know, what we used to describe as an academic elite, when I went to university, only 5% of people went to university in the UK. Now it's over 40%. Um, I know people with PhDs, Alex, who I wouldn't entrust the care of a rodent. I people would describe me as academic and intelligent. Well, there are some things that I am academically gifted at, but that doesn't mean to say I'm intelligent at everything, or that I would necessarily, be able to complete traditional exams in a lot of subjects that I'm not particularly good at, mathematics being one of them. Um, so I think it is about, let's reframe our understanding of intelligence, and let's think about how do we create safe learning spaces where children feel that they belong. Remember, children are genetically programmed to experience intense distress and anxiety if they feel isolated and they don't feel that they belong or are protected. So zero tolerance behavior policies and all this constant talk of punishment actually does no good at all. Um, Children learn by modeling the behavior they see from their primary caregivers. So for teachers, it is about provide choices in learning, in how you design and deliver your lessons. Make your lessons multisensory, make them multimodal, use lots of different types of media, film, infographic, talking, debate. Um, you know, make it as rich as possible in terms of the different ways that children can respond to what it is that you're trying to teach them. Why does everything have to be, you know, um, 2,000 word essay or whatever whatever it might be? And a really interesting example of this is I was doing some training for a global retailer, um, and we had a meeting and they wanted some training and they were just saying they just spent 4 days recruiting for four vacancies they had on the shop floor in their premium store on Oxford Street in London. And I said, you went, okay, what kind of skills are you looking for? And he said, well, young people got really good interpersonal skills who know how to engage with customers and things like that. And I said, and you use CVs, written CVs. I said, tell me, how did you do your initial sift? Oh, well, we threw away the ones that had spelling mistakes or grammar mistakes. I said, right, okay. The skills you're looking for that particular role are good interpersonal skills. Why didn't you just ask them to send in a 2 minute WhatsApp sort of face to camera video? Surely that would have given you better indication of whether they had the right skills for the role that you had. And similarly, I think, you know, the days where we just thought having a degree meant that you were intelligent are gone. We live in a different world. Young people are going to have different careers. Technology is changing things so much. You mentioned artificial intelligence before. I mean, this is the fifth revolution of modern humankind, isn't it? The first one was the written word. The second was the printing press. The third was the industrial revolution. The fourth, which was the technology revolution, which was only 50 years ago. And we're now entering the fifth, which is artificial intelligence and synthetic biology. And I was talking to an amazing woman who's a CEO of a bioscience company called Twist in San Francisco called Emily LaProust. And she said, we're about a decade away from being able to put the contents of the internet onto synthetic DNA in a suitcase. That is how quickly things are moving. Um, and we need to be preparing young people for a world where tech is going to be doing a lot more than we ever realized. And our exam system is designed to measure how much people can recall from the hard drive of knowledge that they've got,
Mm.
rather than how do they use what they've learned in a very practical way that gives them a sense of purpose and an ability to contribute to their communities, their society, their economy, in a way that is helpful and supportive and grounded in good ethics and values and a sense of citizenship in terms of what is good for everybody, not just what is good for myself and how much I earn.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot there, but I think, yeah, what you said around assessment is so true. Assessment now is kind of measuring working memory almost. You go away, you study your notes, and you come back and you recount them, right? And like you said, you can outsource your memory to your phone now. It's these things need to be
Yeah,
tracked.
it's that really simple checklist, isn't it? Redefine your concept of intelligence, diversify your teaching and learning, your pedagogy, and create choice and movement and different forms of measurement, and recognize the necessity of relationship, and therefore your need to understand something about developmental psychology, the neuroscience of learning, um, and the context that we live in, because the world we live in now is very different to the one that we were in even 20 years ago, and that our economy and our jobs are very different to what they were 20 years ago, and they're going to change even more. Teaching is such an incredibly challenging job. It can also be one of the most rewarding jobs in the world. It's, I think teachers are undervalued and overworked. And I think the problem lies in who decides how we measure whether or not we've got a good education system or not.
Absolutely. And I mean, yeah, I think, yeah, teachers have one of the most important roles in your life, really, apart from, a parent and
Mm.
guardian. And I remember having an amazing teacher who would always whisper to me, "Oh, Alex, t adults are always going to look successful because they just pick the one thing that they're good at. They don't have to do anything else." And, that kind of, it's
It's so true.
yeah,
Yeah.
you just said follow your interests because that will exponentially, take you places. And I think those types of messages are really, really true. I'm cognizant of time, just to jump quickly to the student side of things. An academic and studied and wrote essays and research, and I'm sure at times it could get boring or you could get overwhelmed or you struggled with deadlines. Is there a, I guess, a trick or even like a structure or a mindset that you use to maintain well-being as best as possible during your studies?
Well, I'm sure some of the students are going to go when they hear me say this. Healthy lifestyle choices. Understand the body mind, the body brain connection. Our brain will function well if we look after everything else about us. Enough sleep, nutrition. You'd be amazed at how different vitamins and minerals affect cognitive functioning. Um, Exercise, and that could be a brisk walk. That doesn't mean go in the gym every day at all. Um, Habits, developing healthy daily habits around studying, learning, structure, to-do lists, wall charts, things like this, because habits require no motivation. And often motivation is an issue. Whereas if something has become habitual, it doesn't need the energy of motivation. And motivation is much easier when we feel physically well and nourished and properly rested. It's the most important thing. The second thing I would say is understand your own cognitive profile. And, there are things like the Do It Cognitive Profiler out there now, which are all strength based, not deficit based. That will help you understand your particular cognitive profile, whether it's a spiky profile, and you can then think about, okay, what particular learning strategies work best for me with this particular cognitive profile? How do I play to my strengths? What assistive technology can I use? How can I, employ different strategies around, movement? I used to find revision mind-numbingly boring. But in the end, I realized that I could go on revision walks with a load of flashcards. I would have a different route for different subjects. And when it got to exam time, in my mind, I'd stored that memory in so many different parts of my brain because I wasn't just reading it, I was actually experiencing it in a multi-sensory way. And I knew if I went for walk number one, where I'd stopped at the post box, and that was where I learned all about photosynthesis, and then I moved on to the church on the corner where I studied reproduction, and then there are so many different ways that work for different individuals. So I would say know your cognitive profile, then identify the different types of strategies and assistive technology that work for you. Um, A lot of people with ADHD are very visual learners. So again, when I was, create an infographic for every assignment you do, and there's some great software out there now that can help with this. I could never remember 10 pages of a document I used to get when people would share things at work, reply all, and you get all these PDFs to read, and I would never be able to absorb them. Um, but I found I've had an infographic uh, with a cue-dependent ADHD memory. I was much better able then to remember what was in the document. So think about how you can find cues that can improve recall if you've got poor working memory, um, and make your learning multisensory and multimodal. Reading is not enough. You must take notes. You must use highlighter pens. You must make bullet points. You must like, revision and learning posters. Put them on your bedroom wall. I know they don't look great, but every time you go into your room, you are revising without even realizing it. You're constantly reinforcing something so that it does get embedded into long-term memory. But I go back to the thing, Alex, about your emotional well-being is critical because emotion is what provides the turbocharge to encode learning into neural pathways in your brain. And if you feel good and confident and optimistic and you're looking after yourself properly and not getting too drunk of a weekend and not burning the candle at both ends, and think about how much money you're paying for your education and you want to get value for money out of it, then recognize that your subjective sense of well-being, your confidence, your sense of happiness, which is the most powerful driver of human beings, has such an important part in your ability to learn. Anxious, tired people do not learn successfully. And then that also starts to affect your mood. You start to become depressed. You start to have negative, self-defeating, self-limiting thoughts, when actually simple, healthy lifestyle choices can do a lot about optimizing your neurocognitive functioning. But rather than go through a list of various different apps and things like that, I would say, there are some online cognitive profiling tests that I think are free. Um, find out what your cognitive profile is and then learn what strategies. But routine, sort of habits, structure, absolutely crucial, particularly if you've got ADHD, because you will feel in control of what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's great advice. And I liked what you said about the walks down different routes. That's awesome. We often tell students to get creative. Like you don't need to sit at the library for 8 hours a day with your friends. Like
Mm.
what works for you. And I think, yeah, going down different paths and learning different topics is awesome.
And there's great, I mean, look at YouTube. I mean, great resources on YouTube, particularly people like Dr. Ned Halliwell. He's the guy who said neurodiversity is a triumph of lived experience over theory. This is the people saying, I'm not disordered, I'm not disabled, I'm not an error of genetics, I'm not stupid, I'm not lazy,
Mhm.
I just think differently. It doesn't mean to say I don't have ability and potential or value or that I don't belong or that I haven't got something to contribute to society. When you look at the great geniuses and entrepreneurs, who have ADHD, the guy who founded IKEA, for example, and Richard Branson, everybody knows. I mean, there's so many. Um, that there's so much that we can do, um, if we kind of have a much more strength-based approach to our own particular neurocognitive profile and some self-compassion for the fact that we're not great at everything. And the pursuit of happiness is absolutely integral to the human condition, isn't it?
Absolutely. We have a student, she's amazing. Actually, I've spoken to her that does 10 minutes of work and 3 minutes of rest for about 8 hours a day on our platform. And that's just what works for her. She's amazing.
Wow.
I don't know how she does it, but yeah, she just said that's what works for her. It makes it less overwhelming. and
Mm.
she feels like she's completing things. And we often tell students like,
Yeah,
yeah, look at how do you feel that day? What do you have to get done? How much time do you have? And set up a study
yeah.
session like a sports training session and work towards that goal.
How you start your day is really important. I mean, for me, I do the 20-20-20 rule. I get up for first 20 minutes. I get washed, I get changed, I go for a walk for 20 minutes, come back, I do some you'll be amazed. The Buddhists were right all along. Breathing in and out for 5 in, 5 out, exhaling slowly significantly improves your cognitive functioning. And if you did that for 5 minutes, 4 or 5 times a day, it helps you rewire your brain and build stronger neural pathways so that you can remember information. Um, that's why structure and routine are particularly important for people with ADHD. And also, you need to be mindful that having a creative, dopamine hungry brain also makes you susceptible to addiction. So be careful about how much caffeine you take. Don't start smoking, you'll never stop. Please stay away from substances because they're a trapdoor if you've got ADHD. Other people might get high, you just get calm, but you also become addicted very quickly. And that can be, you can become addicted to exercise. Um, you can become addicted to a lot of things. So understanding that, there are certain vulnerabilities, let's be honest, ADHD is not always an easy thing to live with. But if you understand it,
Mhm.
you can think, right, I can make informed decisions here
Mhm.
about what's going to work best for me.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And, for university, for a lot of students, is that first go at adulthood. It's that first go of independence. And I think it's quite a shock when you realize how much executive functioning you need to go to university. Like you've got to balance friends, you've got to balance part-time work, volunteering, work experience. It's a
Money,
yeah, money. Yeah, exactly. It's a huge, just yeah, it's a game changer, right? That jump from high school to higher education. And so.
so why isn't executive functioning skills part of the curriculum?
Yeah, yeah. It's incredible. And I mean, what we're finding in our work is that university is that kind of first place that you can get a cohort of students together with ADHD and actually educate them on what it means to have ADHD, how the symptoms show up in your day-to-day studying. And but yeah, I think you're right. I think just educating yourself on how your brain works, what makes your brain tick, what interests you, and how to set up habits that can, keep you productive.
And celebrating neurodiversity should be part of every educational establishment because when we go out into the world, whether we've got ADHD or dyslexia or autism or not, we are working with and we have friends who think differently from us, who have these different neurotypes. We should avoid this notion of, well, you put people in ghettos, you're ADHD, so you're in that class, or you're dyslexic, so you can go in that class. When that's not the kind of world we live in. It's the universal design that we all have a very unique brain, and that's something that should be celebrated, not segregated.
Absolutely. And I think we'll end on that. I think that's the perfect ending to this interview. I had so much fun chatting to you. I think you've got just a wealth of knowledge on this topic, and it is so fantastic to hear your insights. So I really thank you for joining me, Tony.
Thanks very much, Alex. Nice to meet you.
Yes, very nice to meet you.